When the system breaks every single day, an invisible machine keeps America running. Food reaches grocery stores, fuel arrives at gas stations, medicine shows up at hospitals, electronics land on shelves just in time. That machine is the supply chain, and at the center of it all is California. Now imagine what happens when tens of thousands of truck drivers disappear from that system, not because demand fell, not because ports shut down, but because the rules governing the industry changed faster than the system could adapt. That is exactly what is unfolding right now. More than 7,000 truck operators are being pushed out, forced to relocate, or compelled to abandon the work model they've relied on for decades. Fines are mounting, companies are shutting down, capacity is shrinking. This isn't a distant policy debate anymore. It's a live stress test of America's logistics backbone, and the consequences will not stay in California. California's ports, the beating heart of U.S. trade. California is not just another state in the supply chain, it is the cornerstone. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach form the largest port complex in North America. Together, they handle more than $500 billion worth of cargo every year, accounting for nearly one-third of all containerized imports entering the United States. Everything from household goods to industrial components flows through these docks before spreading across the country. Entire industries, warehousing, retail, manufacturing, depend on what happens here. Because of this scale, the system is efficient but fragile. It works only when every link holds. Trucks are one of the most critical links. When freight leaves the docks, it does not move by rail first, it moves by truck. Any disruption at this stage creates immediate bottlenecks, and in 2025, that bottleneck is no longer theoretical. The triple regulatory collision. What makes this moment different from past disruptions is not a single regulation, but the simultaneous rollout of multiple laws, each targeting a different part of the trucking ecosystem. First, there is AB 5, California's worker classification law, which fundamentally reshapes how independent contractors are defined. For trucking, this strikes at the heart of the owner-operator model that has dominated port drayage for decades. Second, AB 692 eliminates stay-or-pay training contracts, preventing companies from requiring drivers to repay training costs if they leave a job early. While intended to protect workers from debt-based coercion, it removes a key retention tool for carriers. Third, the Advanced Clean Trucks rule mandates a rapid transition towards zero-emission vehicles, requiring fleets to invest in electric trucks long before the supporting infrastructure is fully in place. Each policy has a clear objective. Together, they create overlapping pressure that few operators are prepared to absorb. Why independent truckers are the most exposed. Independent owner-operators make up a significant portion of California's port trucking workforce. Many own a single truck. Some lease equipment. Others operate on thin margins that depend on flexibility and low overhead. For these drivers, independence is not a loophole, it is the business model. AB 5 challenges that model directly by forcing companies to either reclassify drivers as employees or sever relationships entirely. For large fleets, compliance is expensive but possible. For small operators, it can be existential. The result is a cascading effect. Drivers lose contracts. Carriers reduce capacity. Freight movement slows. What once worked as a decentralized system begins to fragment. The first major enforcement shock. The theoretical risks became reality when California issued one of its first major enforcement actions under the new framework. 3 companies were fined a combined $868,128 for misclassifying dozens of drivers. Investigators cited flat daily pay, lack of overtime, absence of benefits, and no safety net during slow periods. The penalty itself was significant. The signal it sent was even larger. This was no longer about guidance or warnings. Enforcement had begun, and capacity, once gone, is not easily replaced. The federal layer, licensing and workforce uncertainty. As the industry absorbed the shock of state-level mandates, a new challenge emerged at the federal level. A nationwide audit targeted commercial driver's licenses held by non-citizens, uncovering thousands of cases where work authorization timelines did not align with license validity. California identified more than 17,000 licenses with compliance issues. The implications were immediate. Drivers faced suspension or revocation. Employers faced staffing shortages. The state risked losing federal highway funding. Immigrant drivers represent roughly 20% of California's trucking workforce, particularly in port and regional operations. Removing even a fraction of them at once creates a severe labor vacuum. Legal challenges followed, arguing due process violations. but uncertainty alone was enough to disrupt operations. Freight does not wait for court rulings. AB 692 and the end of training leverage. When AB 692 took effect, it quietly changed another pillar of the trucking labor system. For years, carriers offset training costs by requiring drivers to remain employed for a set period or repay those costs upon departure. The practice was controversial, but widespread. Now, it is illegal. Each violation carries a minimum $5,000 fine per driver, creating substantial liability for carriers with large training programs. The law shifts risk entirely onto employers. Training becomes a sunk cost, with no guarantee of retention. In an already tight labor market, this forces carriers to compete aggressively on pay, benefits, and conditions, driving costs higher across the board. The zero-emission mandate and infrastructure reality layered on top of labor challenges is California's push toward zero-emission trucking. Electric Class 8 trucks cost between $4,000 and $6,000, 2 to 3 times the price of diesel models. Even with state vouchers covering up to $24,000 per vehicle, the upfront investment remains daunting. Infrastructure is the larger problem. There are currently fewer than 3,000 charging ports statewide capable of serving medium and heavy-duty trucks. The state estimates it will need 157,000 by 2030. That gap is not just large, it is systemic. Without charging infrastructure, trucks cannot operate. Without trucks, freight does not move. Policy ambition is colliding with physical limitations. Early warning signs at the ports. For a time, the ports appeared resilient. Container volumes surged to record levels, driven by post-pandemic demand and businesses racing to avoid tariffs. But that resilience masked underlying fragility. By mid-2025, throughput dropped to its lowest point in 2 years. Some of this decline reflected trade volatility, some reflected strategic inventory adjustments, but industry insiders warned that regulatory uncertainty was beginning to affect routing decisions. When shippers lose confidence in reliability, they look elsewhere. Diversion does not require collapse, it only requires doubt. Economic forecasts raise the alarm. Looking ahead, economists project a 10 to 17% decline in California port volumes in early 2026. Canceled orders, higher inventory costs, slower turnaround times. None of these outcomes signal total failure, but together they indicate a system operating with shrinking margins. Supply chains are optimized for efficiency, not redundancy. When flexibility disappears, prices rise and delays multiply. Consumers notice last. The political crossroads state leadership has acknowledged the scale of the challenge. Officials frame the reforms as necessary steps toward fair labor standards and environmental sustainability. At the same time, they concede that implementation must adapt quickly to real-world constraints. This is the central tension. Move too slowly and reform fails. Move too fast and the system breaks. Finding balance in a live, high-stakes logistics network is extraordinarily difficult, and the cost of miscalculation extends far beyond state borders. Why the nation is watching California's trucking crossroads is not a local issue. If capacity contracts here, freight reroutes. If costs rise here, prices rise nationwide. If reliability falters here, inventories thin everywhere. This is how regional policy becomes national consequence. What is happening now will shape how goods move, how much they cost, and how resilient America's supply chain will be in the decade ahead. Conclusion: the road ahead. The trucks are still rolling. The ports are still operating. The system has not collapsed, but it is under strain. California is attempting something ambitious, transforming labor standards and environmental policy within the busiest freight corridor in the country. Whether that transformation succeeds depends on timing, coordination, and adaptability. Because supply chains do not fail all at once. They fray, they slow, they reroute. And by the time the impact reaches store shelves, the decisions that caused it are long past. So the real question is not whether change is coming, it's whether the system can survive the way it's being delivered.